When John and I had a chat about what I'd cover, he mentioned Louise Richardson, Dame Louise Richardson, who was appointed by the government to create a report based on the so-called international forum, or at least forum on international security policy, which was held exactly 3 years ago, June 2023. And it brought me back to that moment. And I'll quote Louise Richardson here. She said, inevitably there were criticisms made of the purpose and the structure of the forum and the makeup of the panels. Indeed, our former president, Michael D. Higgins, wrote an article criticizing the composition of those panels. She said, from my perspective as an outsider, I believe that this was an admirably open and transparent process where unfettered debate was encouraged and a wide range of views expressed. Well, I got a call and an email from, I think it was the Department of the Taoiseach, to appear at this forum. And I said, well, what's the process here? Well, you just come along and there's going to be a discussion. I said, okay, great. How long is the panel? 75 minutes. I said, great. So I want to be able to present data on public attitudes to Irish neutrality. May I do so? Oh, hold on a minute. I'll get back to you on that. The reply came, no. I said, okay, well, can I at least just have 3 minutes out of the 75 minutes? 3 minutes just to speak on the topic of public opinion on Irish neutrality. Oh, hang on a sec, I'll go and find out. She came back, no. I said, oh, I thought this was a discussion. Why are you asking me? You know I've been researching and publishing on Irish neutrality and public opinion for, well, nearly 20 years at that point. And she said, no, you're going to be asked questions. I said, oh, right. So I'm not allowed to say what I want to say, but I will be asked questions? She said, yes. I said, okay. May I have the questions, please? Oh, hold on. She came back. No. I said, I respectfully decline your invitation. So here I am to speak on values. And around that time, what I would have said had I been given the chance is that consistently over 45 years of opinion polls from 1981 through to February of this year, 2026, 4 in 5 people in Ireland support neutrality. That's it. It has not changed. It has not wavered. Now, Dame Louise Richardson, on behalf of the government, said in her report, well, people are attached to neutrality, that's clear. There's no public mandate to get rid of the triple lock. However, she said, they don't really know what they're attached to. She's wrong. Of course she's wrong. And that's why I wasn't allowed to speak, because what I would have told her is that public support for neutrality is consistent over 45 years of opinion polling, over 21 opinion polls that I analysed, because it's underpinned by values that actually don't change capriciously. They don't change by the moment. And those values are, firstly, how proud are you to be Irish? So it embodies who we are as a post-colonial people, anti-imperialist, anti-militarist, UN peacekeeping only, no war fighting, and so forth. And the other part is that we don't want to join NATO for very solid reasons, because we know from its history that it is imperialist, not anti-imperialist. It is militarist, not anti-militarist. And what was really shocking was that in that entire forum, not one mention of the military-industrial complex was uttered. And the second part of the values that underpin public support for neutrality is independence. So we don't want to get dragged into wars. Philip mentioned De Valera's speech in 1932. He said, we don't want to join an EU federation or confederation, this was in the Dáil in the 1950s, that would drag us into a war. And that's what membership of NATO would do, and that's what deeper integration into EU security structures will do. So in terms of that, in 2008, Alison Bayliss, who's an academic, was looking on the periphery of what was happening at the EU level in terms of security and defence. And I'm quoting her here. She said in an article she published, ESDP, European Security and Defence Policy, is not about doing good for the world, but about the power of Europe. And when you look at that and compare it to, say, Holly McLaughlin, who's the wife of Corporal Dermot McLaughlin, who was killed on active service as a UN peacekeeper as part of the Irish Defence Forces on the 10th of January 1987. She said, "My husband looked forward to his tour of duty as a peacekeeper with UNIFIL. His only interest was to try to do some good." So when you look at how the word good is used in each of those, it's very clear on what side good lies. When we decided to get into European security and defence integration, Bertie Ahern said, we're going into it because, and we're going to get involved with NATO because it is the expressed preferences of our partners in Europe. Not because it's going to do any good, but because this is what the impetus is for. And indeed, in 2008, then, we look at our involvement in Chad, where the Minister of Defence at the time, Willie O'Dea, said on the 8th of September 2009, we're effectively going into Chad because it shows that the EU is a global actor. Quoting the EU, describing it as the most ambitious military operation to date, to show that the EU is a global player. It was going in, and Ireland was supporting this mission, which was structured in the interests of the French government to prop up a corrupt colonial dictator. And when you see then what is said in the academic literature, it was a PR exercise. Such engagement came to be perceived as an opportunity to demonstrate that CSDP, Common Security and Defence Policy, was about peacekeeping and supporting the UN. Quoting an academic here, thus very much in line with their national foreign policy traditions, particularly for the post-neutral countries, Ireland. This is Benjamin Pole writing in 2014. And indeed, a French government official said, given the results of the first Lisbon Treaty referendum, where a majority of people said no due to concerns for neutrality, something again Dame Louise Richardson said wasn't the case in that forum, the government wanted to show the Irish that CSDP is not a European army, but that it acts to support the UN and humanitarian purposes. Again, we're talking about values. However, we are now part of what's called, well, the rapid deployment capacity of the European Union. It's a standing army, something that the Irish politicians always said we would never be involved in. And interestingly, I'm going to quote Lieutenant General Sean Clancy, who was then Chief of the Irish Defence Forces in September, October 2024. He said, in line with the recommendations of the Commission on the Defence Forces, a report published again at the behest of the government in 2003, he said, we must strive to meet NATO standards. And that's why we're engaging in these raising levels of ambition. We have to aspire to these higher levels into the future as these new capabilities reach full operating capacity. We must ensure that we maintain parity with our partners. Harking back to that line of discourse from Bertie Ahern, the preferences of our European partners. And then Lieutenant General Clancy thanked the government for appointing him, or nominating him, and he was subsequently appointed to chairman of the EU Military Committee, starting in May 2025. He said that the government agreed to nominate me for the position in the first instance was a huge honour, and the fact that I've been chosen by my peers in a secret ballot to succeed the current chairman was a great honour for Ireland and the Defence Forces. And this is what he said: the EU Military Committee demands consensus from all countries in terms of decision making. The EU claims to have values of unity and diversity, but there is no diversity. There is one way, and it is the militarist way. And so the discourse now is to make sure that peacekeeping is conflated with warfighting through various language, wordplay mechanisms. Again, Lieutenant General Clancy said, currently Irish troops are deployed in multiple missions worldwide, notably Lebanon and the Golan Heights. The Defence Forces have also supported peacekeeping efforts through contribution to training missions, such as the EU training missions in Somalia and Mali, aimed at building capacities and capabilities in poor nations. That wasn't a peacekeeping operation. So what they've done very cleverly is said the Defence Forces have also supported peacekeeping efforts, not engaged in peacekeeping, supported peacekeeping efforts. So as long as you can keep putting the word peacekeeping into a sentence, because the previous sentence was very clear, we're on missions in the Lebanon. The next sentence is we're engaged in supporting peacekeeping. It wasn't peacekeeping. Again, it was training state militias for war fighting. Nothing to do with the UN and peacekeeping. So finally, I have 3.5 minutes left. So one of the things I want to show you, and I know PowerPoint wasn't possible, and you won't be able to see this very clearly, but you might be able to see the colors. So what I've done is I've plotted, along with a student colleague, Daniel Farrelly, every parliamentary question that has been put in the Oireachtas about where our defence forces are deployed overseas. So the first thing you might see is that there is a green line. I don't know if it's very prominent here, but it's now gone backwards. So it shows that there's a decrease. So we used to have like up to 15,000 people in the Defence Forces. It's now half that, 7,500, and rapidly decreasing, particularly since the government announced its decision in 2024 that Ireland was going to stop UN peacekeeping. It pulled out of UNDOF for this purpose and transfer our troops to the Standing European Army, the Rapid Deployment Capacity, the new EU battle group. So you can see from here, there is a shaded area, and what I wanted to speak to that is that this was a moment in 2007 to 2008 where Ireland had no UN peacekeepers on mission. This is the blue line here. But what we did have was EU military operation deployments and NATO-led military operation deployments. So that purple shaded box is a moment in time that will actually be the trajectory of this graph from here on in. Because once UNIFIL is wound down next year, we're only going to be doing NATO and EU-led. Funnily enough, only 34 people out of the 7,500 have signed up to participate voluntarily in the EU Army. 34. And the last thing I wanted to show you is this. So it's a blue graph, and there's these stacks. Can you see the stacks? And then there's a red line. So this is the red line. So the blue stacks, it's US data. It's government spending on the military-industrial complex. It started around 1961 when Eisenhower said, beware of the military-industrial complex. And it has continued to nearly 1 trillion, which is 1,000 billion every single year. The red line is public trust in the corporate media, the mass media, which has plummeted from the same time point from 75% to less than 23% now currently. I don't think that relationship, which is inverse, is a coincidence. And you can see it in the discourses here that my work tries to dispel. So to conclude, I think I've 30 seconds left. So Lieutenant General, I didn't beat Philip's record, sorry. Lieutenant General Sean Clancy, again, as Chief of Staff, said about the Irish Defence Forces, I wish to pay tribute to our soldiers, sailors, airmen and airwomen who are deployed with the 124th Infantry Battalion, UNIFIL HQ, and overseas mission. Our overseas peacekeeping is a tangible expression of Irish sovereignty and our values as a nation. I believe it's a great source of pride for our citizens. We are now at the precipice with the abolishment of the triple lock, which is imminent, I think next week probably, that we are no longer going to have overseas peacekeeping as a reflection of Irish sovereignty and our values as a nation, which directly contradicts everything that we stand for as a people and which the data shows, because we support neutrality. due to our national identity and our desire to be independent of great power politics and militarism. Most states in the world are small post-colonial states like Ireland, and they want Ireland to continue to defend small state interests and to reject EU, NATO military ambitions and operations. So in jettisoning the triple lock, the government is essentially placing the state, its citizens, and our defence forces in the crosshairs of big power conflict, and it's betraying our small state global allies and our common interests of global peace. In destroying the social contract and democracy in Ireland, the government, together with the EU, is showing its true militarist imperialist character, because that slide I showed you about the US military-industrial complex approaching $1,000 billion, in the next multi-financial framework, 5-year framework for the EU budget, the EU is going to spend $800 billion on defence. So it's going to rival the US military-industrial complex. And so what I'll say to you is we have to continue to resist by all peaceful and democratic means possible what the government is doing against our interests and against common humanity. Thank you.